Yes, hello and good morning to everyone, and be very much welcome in this European Roundtable on circular economy in the ICT industry. It's our first roundtable of a full week European Summit on the SDGs. I am Jan Notterdame and I am your moderator for this roundtable. And we will have to end in time because we have the first high-level plenary session starting immediately after. You all have received the agenda and there will be mainly 4 slots. We will first listening to William and to Ilias from the European Commission, setting the context, explaining what are the new EU policy expectations and initiatives in the area we are discussing. We will listen then to practitioners in companies, explaining us a little bit better what are the challenges they face, but also how do they see the priority actions that can be taken at short or longer term. And then we will also have the pleasure to have representatives from ETNO and from GSMA, making, I would say, a state of play with regard already existing collaborative action that they are driving. And then Stefan Kretz, Executive Director of Csr Europe, will check. He will then check if the conditions are there, if the business case is mature enough to incubate and develop a new practical collaborative platform. We have been preparing this session together with colleagues within Orange, and thank you for that. And I would like already to extend my thanks to Emanuela, who is helping in setting up this roundtable altogether. So be most welcome. And before I start, I would like just to share some technical information. Although we will have not very much time for a Q&A session, I still would like to invite you to make full use of the interactive session capacities that we have put in place with our provider. Of course, you can then click on the live discussion function at the bottom right corner of your screen, and then you will see popping up a number of functionalities, a chat function, a questions function, and also you can directly interact with speakers or with other attendees, and therefore you have the networking function. And last but not least, make sure that you do not end or leave this roundtable or leave the summit before visiting the Csr Europe shop. It's called the Csr Toolbox, and there you can contact or have one-to-one calls with staff members of Csr Europe, and also access useful tools, initiatives, services or programs on helping you to advance sustainability in your organization. So before I give the floor to the first speakers, I would like to set some more of the context. The purpose of this summit, but also of this roundtable, is to go beyond debating and analyzing. We really would like to help shape new collective action. And one reason for that is that we see in the results of the first European Sustainable Industry Barometer that is being launched today. It is happening in another roundtable right now, but also in the plenary session at 11:30. If you look at one of the results, it's very clear that if you look at all the industry sector federations that we have been interviewing in this barometer, all of them have sustainability in their vision and mission, but only 30% do provide to their members impact-driven projects, is it sector or cross-sector projects? And that is quite a strong gap. We have to bridge that gap, since experience is showing us that if you have the methodology right, these are the kinds of projects that are contributing to what we call bottom-up standardization of solutions, which companies, if they act only individually, cannot reach or achieve alone. So that is why we would like to put the test also for this roundtable. How can it contribute to define more practical collective action. Happy now to welcome William Neela. You have been active in business for more than 13 years. You also then spent 7 years at the European Commission in DG Grow, and you have been acting for 11 years as a member of cabinet, various commissioners. So you have, and the practical side, but also the helicopter view. So what are the new expectations of the Commission on business to become more circular, more green? William, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, Jan, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. Yeah, I think that the van der Leyen Commission has really been the first to bring together the green and the digital. So I think that the theme of this workshop this morning is very pertinent. They're really two different worlds and speaking two different languages, and Ilias and I have been, I think, kind of at the vanguard of bringing the two together. We've been talking to each other for a couple of years, and in that time, things have really developed very quickly. We're seeing a huge momentum developing. We're seeing a lot of events. We're seeing a lot of research. We've had council conclusions and parliament resolutions. We've seen the recovery and resilience plans embracing sort of the green and the digital very explicitly, but it's still very difficult. And I say that a lot of the barrier to that is the language. And before going on to say a little bit about how the digital sector can become more circular, I'll just make a very general point about circularity, because there's still a common misconception. I think it's very important to understand that circularity isn't about recycling, it's about value retention. So I think perhaps the best way to envision it is like a river of materials flowing through our economy, and our objective is really to make that river slow down so that the materials that are embodied in the assets, in the buildings, in the products that we're using, that we get the most use out of them, that we make them last for longer, and that we use them more intensively, and we keep that value in the economy, we keep that functionality. And so circularity really is about the design and the business models to make that work, and the consumption patterns to make that work. And it's complex. But the important message is that once something is waste, it's really it's lost its value. Once it flows out of the economy, it's lost its value, and we need to kind of make that river into a lake so that we're keeping that value in for as long as possible. Now, if you look at the beginning of that river, about well, the UN recently estimated that about 90% of biodiversity loss and about 50% of greenhouse gas emissions are linked to production or extraction, processing, those parts. And so the use phase of those materials when they're in the products and so on is proportionately rather less than you might imagine. But that depends very much on what you're talking about. So if you're talking about a smartphone, about 80% of the impacts of that smartphone occur before you open the packaging and start using it. And then when you consider that we tend, well, on average, we keep a smartphone for about 21 months, and only about 40% of us change our smartphone because it's not working anymore, then you see that there's a massive value loss there. There's a massive potential for getting more value out of those smartphones. But it has to be said that every different product has a different profile in that sense, and consumer electronics is particularly diverse in that sense. So whereas a smartphone might be 80% of the impact before you open it, if you look at something like a computer screen or a server, then the use phase is far more important. So that suggests that you need a little bit of a different set of policies to deal with those impacts best, and make those items more circular. A big issue or a big question, I think, which is often asked about the digital sector and circularity is whether the enabling potential of digital outweighs the impact of the electronics that we use and the data centers, energy use, and so on. And I think the answer there is potentially yes. And so the jury's a bit out on that, because it really depends on whether you have the right policies to harness that enabling capacity. Digital technologies can just as easily accelerate unsustainable consumption and production as they can be used to achieve circularity. So we need to get that policy framework right. And I've seen this very much recently in concrete terms in working on the taxonomy, where we were looking at the potential, or we were looking at to establish criteria, technical screening criteria for establishing how digital technologies could have a substantial contribution to circularity. And then in the end, you have to say, well, it depends what they're used for, because it's the production of technology is one thing, but then it can be applied to different things. So that again shows that the policy framework is very important. So the policy framework, I think that we can look at three things in terms of the circular economy policies of the Commission. As you know, last year we adopted the second Circular Economy Action Plan. And I think that the first groundbreaking thing is the value chain approach. And we tested this with the plastic strategy in the first Circular Economy Action Plan. And this idea of having a very systemic approach, and we sort of moved away from environment policy being about punishing polluters. So in electronics, we still have the waste electronic and electrical equipment directive. We still deal with waste, and we'll still, I guess, punish member states that don't get to the 85% targets and so on. We still have the legislative possibility to punish polluters, but what we're trying to do is have this kind of systemic approach to value chains, where we're trying to use a whole panoply, a whole toolbox of policies, ranging from investment to research, from company pledges like that you mentioned earlier, to soft policy. So that'd be the first thing, is value chain approach. And I think Ilias will say a little bit more about how we intend to apply that to electronics afterwards. The second groundbreaking approach, I think, is product policy. And I think we're at a real first here, because Europe is the first country or region to actually try to harness the market for environmental purposes. We're using the single market tools. We're coming out with a sustainable product initiative in the next couple of months, which will use the eco-design directive and enlarge the scope of it to all kinds of products, not just energy using products, but things like furniture or whatever, and enlarge the sustainability criteria to many criteria, including circularity criteria such as durability, repairability, and so on. And that is really groundbreaking. I think we're using Europe's power with 500 million consumers to establish rules for what we want to have on our markets. Then third is part of that, again, groundbreaking, I think, which is the idea of a digital product passport. This is going to come as part of the Sustainable Products Initiative. And the idea here is really, I talked about circular economy being about value retention. Well, so much of the value of any product these days is encapsulated in the data that is attached to that product, the data that the product generates and the data that people that are using it can generate. And today we have what we see in the van der Leyen approach to data and the forthcoming Data Act, the idea that we don't want to go down the sort of surveillance road. We don't want to go down the road of giving all our data to the big tech giants. We want to be able to use the data in the best way possible. And one of the explicit objectives of the Data Act is to make available commercially held data for public interest where that is useful. And I think what we want to do with the digital product passport, we have the technological capacity, or we have the technologies there, shall we say, to tag products with their own identifier. And then what we need to do next to that is to have a process where we establish what data should be made accessible by the different players along the line. That will be challenging, and it's already happening. A lot of private voluntary things are happening with Global Batteries Alliance and E.ON for textiles and so on. But what we can do as the Commission, of course, is we have an extra convening power, and we have the possibility through implementing acts to actually impose certain requirements in terms of access to data. And we're not looking at making masses and masses of data available and big obligations, but really those things which are so important for one player down the line to have in order to make circularity happen. And often without great cost or administrative burden, but without an incentive for the person to higher up the chain to make that data available. So I think I've spoken for my 10 minutes there, Jan. I'm happy to speak a bit later on some of the individual aspects of what we're doing. We're coming up with a review of the waste shipment regulation, which will have an impact on electronic exports, illegal shipments of waste electronics. We have a review of the Waste Electronic and Electrical Equipment Directive coming up. We have take-back schemes. So there are many areas that I can go into more depth on later, but I'll hand over to Ilias now to talk a little bit more about the value chain for circular electronics.
Great, thank you so much, William. Thank you, and indeed, welcome also to Ilias. And Ilias, it was interesting to see how you have been for so many years being a pioneer in the EU agenda on e-health. And I'm tempted to say that you continue to care, but this time under, I would say, a new function. Recently, you have been initiating the European Green Digital Coalition. So we are very curious. What is the purpose of this coalition? How can it practically serve the different industry sectors which all enter the digital transition? How do you support companies in the ICT to join the lake, which William was speaking about? Ilias.
Yes, good morning to everybody. Thank you for having me. First of all, the vision that you're asking for and which coalition serves is that the ICT sector is the leader in the drive to net zero. And it's not only drive to net zero earlier than the EU ambition, which is 2050. That means to get there 2040, if possible, as a sector. But more than that, year by year, we need to get better ambitiously now. It's not something that we do just 5 to 12, 2035. So the ambition is that we actually measure what exactly is the impact of ICT and improve the footprint and the contribution to environment year by year. Now, there is a lot of talk about energy consumption. So what is good about this session is to focus on the other footprint, which comes from the material inefficiencies and non-circularity of ICT. I'm sure you've been already to many events talking about e-waste, how big it is, and the problems with recycling, and practical problems with recycling, because today we have no capacity. Today, all the ICT equipment is just put into one big pile, shredded, and then people try to make sense out of it. So even if we talk, and we'll later talk about digital product passport, if we don't have capacity to separate the waste and to do something smarter than it's today, we will have a problem to value such information exchange if the recycling remains like that. Or e-waste is a problematic thing, even for the single market. So what I want to say that as the EU, we see the vision, we're trying to have, as much as we can at the moment, policies and support to innovation. So we have a policy called Circular Electronics Initiative that belongs to the Sustainable Product Initiative package, where we're trying to address the issue in two directions. Supply side, that means eco-design. But the eco-design is well understood and a good instrument. It takes one equipment or one product category at a time. So it's very slow. So we will do the tablets and the iPhones, the mobile phones, but we will have thousands of other things, connected devices, IoT. Every year we come up with a new device. So eco-design cannot catch up. That's why the first ask and the role of today's session, if I understood correctly, is what would I ask ICT industry? So my first ask is get the principles of eco-design, and that means design for durability, remanufacturing, repair, and recycling to more than eco-design can cover. That means try to take those principles and apply them now to even those that are not covered by eco-design, especially IoT, because the IoT, the degree of the deployment of connected devices will be much faster than any consumer device that we normally talk about, smartphones and tablets and so on. If it's true that the projections show 50 billion devices to be connected by 2025. Now imagine that they are not designed for software updates. So those devices hopefully will have some smartness so we can update them wherever they are online, instead of saying, oops, standards have changed, software has changed, something has changed. Let's throw away those 50 billion devices and put a new ones, or just leave them there to rot wherever they are, and let's put a new ones in place. So you imagine that this is an issue, and since IoT connected devices will not be part of the eco-design, this is really something for industry to take into account today as they are developing them, as they are actually producing them. Now, you will see that EU taxonomy is trying to tackle that. So EU taxonomy actually gives incentives for you to get sustainable financing if you follow those principles of design, is it designed for durability and circularity. As you'll see, there are two separate chapters: durability of electronic and electric equipment and circularity. Now the deadline for your comments is over, but we could discuss, and if you want, because now I'll be in touch with EU, with my DG FISMA colleagues, if there is anything that we need to actually take into account that has been forgotten by the new upcoming delegated act, now is the time to act on this one, okay? Another ask I have is something that we already do, and that is, let us really bring the scientific world and the industrial world of understanding what is the footprint, and especially the material footprint of ICT. Let us agree on calculating it correctly. And the exact ask, especially to manufacturer, is, can you work on providing an exact and as accurate as possible footprint of the devices that you manufacture? Can you go down to your supply chain and really see what is the footprint, what is the composition or the material footprint, and basically carbon footprint of the devices? This will be a challenge. I know it's not easy, but as close as we can get to those figures that you can provide, the better, because there are estimates that are much more, my suspicion is that the estimates provided by some of the academic actors are much higher than the real estimates of the footprint of some of these devices. And then we will need to see how to balance, when do we actually, after how many years, it's better to put a new one, because the energy efficiency in the energy consumption is actually better than keeping such old devices there. At the moment, that fight is not been conclusive. So for that, we need data and we need good methodologies. And that's why we have the European Green Digital Coalition to actually agree on methodologies of assessment of net environmental impact. Another ask I have is, I have proposed that DG Connect funds a Digital Europe program, call for proposals. So we will have a 2 million project to design digital product passport in electronics, as well as in batteries and one more sector, but in electronics for sure. I would like industry to really take it, because we cannot afford to design digital product passports for any category, and much more for electronics, which is one of the most complex, that is not useful. It has to be minimum necessary data, not nice to have, what we should and must have in order to improve durability and especially circularity. For that, we need the brains and we need the engagement of industry, from manufacturers to repairers to recyclers. We need to know exactly what is the B2B basis of exchange of information that would be based on need to know and minimal, okay? That makes sense for competitiveness, for European autonomy, to minimize the import of rare earths, which is also in your interest as manufacturers, and for recycling. And of course, all that has to make sense in a business sense. That means that in order for you to have new business sense of business models that actually make sense for you, you will have to start having more of a service thinking rather than, profit just by selling new things. And there are already good examples by some of you. putting devices as a leasing model and having your own refurbishment or third-party refurbishment facilities. But that has to be strengthened. So it has to be scaled, and the recycling, especially the recycling, as I said, is ultimately really difficult at the moment. If you as industry can help by your own design and interacting with the recyclers to improve that process. Finally, I think, basically I said it there. So your own engagement in the digital coalition, and we welcome everybody. And just to remind everybody, European Green Digital Coalition is about three things. It's committed companies to 2040 net zero, take their own pledge to invest in greener solutions that they own as companies provide, and deploy in greening purpose. Okay, so that's first. Second, that they will actually agree on net environmental assessment methodology. And third, that they will work with all the other stakeholders to see that they adapt the greener digitalization practices, because not all digitalizations are equal. There are digitalization with a design, sustainability by design principles, where we can minimize the rebound effect and keep the digitalization to be net positive for the environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilias. Thank you very much. And I think it was very, very clear, your three asks. Get the principle of eco-design right, get engaged in the coalition for the three reasons that you just mentioned, and don't miss also the DG Connect call for projects to improve durability. So I think that is a very, very strong signal. And thank you very much for both of you, William, and you, Ilias, to set that context and that direction also. I think that is what is characterizing Europe. We are getting to a more holistic vision and strategy. Time now for me to jump over the fence and introduce our speakers. We have now a panel, including Pia Tanskanen from Nokia. We have Daniel Pasca from Ericsson. We have Tommy Björkberg from ZTE and Florian Dussault from Orange. Welcome to you. I had the pleasure already to talk to you in the preparation for this roundtable. And I have a couple of questions, maybe first to Pia, Daniel, and Tommy. The question is, and I make the link also with what we heard earlier from William and from Ilias. We see that the environmental footprint of the digital sector is expected to double in the next 15 years, but we still need to grasp much better how you, from your business experience, are identifying the challenges that you are facing in that transition towards a more circular business model. Of course, taking also into account the full life cycle approach, and also keeping in mind the different trade-offs. Is it between extending the life cycle of some products? Is it to shorten some in order to improve, or because you can improve energy consumption? It's also about embedding human rights, especially when they are related to raw materials in conflict zones. So how do you see the challenges? And then we will have another question about where do you see for each of you, the one action in the short term and the one action in the longer term. Maybe Pia, can I invite you to open this panel? Welcome to you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to be here. Very important key area for us is really look at the whole life cycle and the whole value chain. That's the main principle for Nokia in how do we actually implement our environmental practices. So focusing on the overall life cycle of the product. And as it was mentioned in the first presentations, this is very different for different product types. And for us who are making telecom infrastructure products, actually the use time power consumption is absolutely the biggest contributor for the life cycle's CO2 emissions of our products. So that's the primary focus. And this is even more important as we see the increased needs for the digitalization and connectivity. So meaning increased throughput of bits through the networks. So we see the traffic growing, and we need to make sure that the needed power is not growing at the same speed. So decoupling the growth of the bits and the power. But circular economy, absolutely very important as well, because electronics products, we need a lot of different materials to actually make them function. And we see the miniaturization, a lot of our products becoming smaller. So we see the environmental footprint in that way decreasing. We have a couple of great innovations where our engineers have been able to integrate products in a way that we get rid of a lot of cables, which means material savings, but also savings in power because there are no losses in the system. So innovations across these things, they actually benefit both on the materials, circularity, and power consumption of the products.
Thank you, Pia. And the same question for you, Daniel. What is your analysis on the challenges that you are facing?
Thank you. I think I of course agree what Pia said in many ways, because we are in the same industry and basically competitors with product. And I also think there is a big difference between business to business product and consumer products. Many of the focuses for the Commission and the Sustainable Products Initiative and the Circular Economy Action Plan, etc., is on consumer products. And there you have the lifespan of the product. And a consumer product has a much shorter lifespan than most often business-to-business products. Our products are like 15 years lifespan. So looking at that, as Pia said, energy consumption. So basically the use phase is the biggest impact from an environmental perspective. And looking at the life cycle, it's important then to focus on the biggest impact, which is energy consumption for us. With 5G, we can drastically reduce the energy consumption compared to previous generations. And there we come into also having a circular flow, because if we look at the circular flow, it can in some cases be better to basically take off equipment from the market and replace it with new equipment, because the energy consumption is much lower. So we are exploring refurbished products to refurbish products, but then of course we need to see exactly what products should be refurbished. We would prefer newer equipment rather than older equipment, and take off older equipment from the market and replace it with newer equipment, and also refurbish these ones. On the same time, the material footprint and the embedded carbon in the materials and in the products is important to minimize weight, look into recycled content of products, and also to explore the substance and material contents in different components and parts of the product. So this is basically the overall content or the overall work we are looking into when it comes to circularity. So it's not only the materials, it's a lot on the energy side as well. So that's in short. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tommy, on your side, how much is the analysis being shared with your colleagues, or is it that you also have identified some other key challenges currently?
Look, I think what everybody's saying is making sense. Obviously, energy is a huge factor in our industry. I go a step further. I think the biggest challenges that we have, and we operate in a market that our government passed legislation in 2009 in relation to the circular economy, which is updated every year. So we had to think about this for a long time. It's easy to sit down. We make consumer electronics, and we make network components, etc. And it's easy to sit down and look at a product and say, I'm going to create a closed loop for this product. I source raw materials for a base station. I put that together in a factory. I want to be as green green as possible in manufacturing. I ship that. We know how much power that consumes over the next 10 years, and you make decisions. But I think you can't look at the circular economy in isolation. I think the biggest challenge for us is to find the path that has the best outcome for society and humanity as a whole. You know, looking at it, I think William mentioned it, circularity, if you just look at it, glance over it, it can look pretty simple. You take raw materials, you process those into a product. That product has a lifespan, and then you try to recover value from that. And this you know, river is flowing, and you want to keep as much value in the river as possible. I think the reality is that sometimes the cost of retaining that value and the environmental impact of retaining that value is outweighed by actually retaining it. So what we are looking at is we're tackling this on, I think, on all fronts. You know, we're obviously looking at ourselves at the company. What are we doing with our green operations? You know, we're using 5G and things like that in our smart factories to minimize the impact of manufacturing. You know, we're shipping products. All of us are shipping products all across the world. So we got shipping and logistics. You know, we put these things in containers. They go on boats that burn crude oil, etc., which is not good for environment. But this is the logistic chain as it is today. One thing that we are really missing is that we're working on is how do you actually track recovery of materials in the circular economy? There is a lot of repairers, there are a lot of recyclers out there, etc. Obviously, that we work with, that is third parties that we don't work with, etc. So one of the issues is once something leaves our factory, goes into a consumer network, and then eventually become decommissioned, etc. How do you actually track that? It's virtually impossible for us to track how much, how much of the gold and other raw materials that is getting reused. You know, we're working with a couple of universities and other things, but seeing is can we embed things like, you know, molecular tracking into materials, and should that be adopted on a more legislative or regulation point of view? But I think, you know, that there's a lot of challenges that we have throughout our industry. And I didn't want to go through just repeat what the others two have said in terms of power, because I think it's a given that, you know, reducing power or slow down the rate which power consumption is increasing is one of the key things that we are working on. But we need to look at it as a whole.
Okay, so Tommy, thank you for that. Well, I think you are putting there a question to our colleagues from the European Commission. I think there's also a question from William to you. I think that he has been raising his hands, but I have a question to the three of you. It was mentioned also by both Elias and William that there is today, Europe tries to take also a leadership role in the taxonomy, the climate, environmental, and circularity taxonomy that will be then complemented also with a social taxonomy. Is that already today considered as an incentive to you, yes or no? Or is that animal very, very complex? So that is a question that I put to you. Maybe, William, you have another question to our distinguished panelists. William.
Yes, I think what would be interesting to know, Elias was already kind of asking the question already in terms of what are the need to get the different stakeholders together to address what are the bits of data that are required to go along the line. And I think what Tommy was just saying about materials, that's one part of what could be linked or accessible via a digital product passport. I mean, I think the digital product passport is, I mean, everybody said there's no silver bullet. I think it's a little bit of a silver bullet, and it can be very useful in a lot of different things. So materials tracking, I mean, we're talking about using it for circularity and sustainability purposes, but of course, once you've got an identifier on a product, you could also use it for many other things. You could use it for due diligence on human rights along the, you know, going back on the chain. You can use it for many different things. I think, yeah, Tommy mentioned materials. There are possibilities, and there are pilots and actually rollout of technologies now for tracking materials, like you said, putting means to track materials. It's very difficult because it's obviously you can mix 1 ton of steel from one place with 10 tons of steel from another place, and it becomes very difficult to trace. But it is happening. We can also use it to trace components. We can use it to trace. We can have dynamic information, not just static information, not just sort of what materials and chemicals are in a product, but how it's used, the performance. We can sort of have digital twins, so we can think about preventive maintenance. But what is interesting for us, I think, is what are the key bits of data that you would like to have that you don't have now? Is it stuff coming from your suppliers? Is it things about the later use of your products down the chain and how you can maybe provide services further on to add value? So I think that's the process that we're going to set in place in the next years, but it would be already extremely useful to have an idea about some of the bigger fruit and the lower hanging fruit.
Who is a volunteer to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with that. It's a it's a good question. I think both it'd be good to know the later use of products, especially like I said in consumer electronic space. I know a lot of operators have handset refurbishment programs and things like that, but the reality is, and I'm also guilty of this, I probably change my mobile phone every 2 years. I might sell it on, I might not. I have a whole whole drawer with old mobile phones, and I don't know, maybe they will go in a bin at some point in time. It's very hard. It's very hard for us to track things like that. Obviously, we can track units shipped, but it's very hard to track the kind of decommissioning, reuse, and things like that of units, as well as, like you said. You're talking about human rights, and obviously then I also assume we're looking into things like raw materials from conflict zones, etc. Right, which has been a huge thing. Unfortunately, a lot of valuable resources do exist in areas which has been ravaged by conflict for a very long time. It's our responsibility to make sure that when resources like that are sourced, obviously monies are not going to war infractions, paying for arms and other atrocities. But on that hand, we're also not mining for those resources. There's a whole value chain there of commodities, etc., that we need to somehow trust that it's regulated. Obviously, we have a responsibility to monitor and ask questions and ask for proof and evidence. So I think it goes both upstreams and downstreams. I think it's important for us to have a much better picture of the kind of downstreams where things are coming from, and also upstreams in terms of what actually happens. Because even on network equipment, we ship routers to base stations, etc. We might not decommission those ourselves. They might be done by we might have a network then, and an Ericsson might come and decommission ZTE equipment and feed that into whatever they have set up in terms of decommissioning with third parties. And then it's virtually impossible to me to know what happens to those products, those raw materials. So it's a challenge, but it's one that we're willing to tackle.
Okay, I see, Elias, that you are raising your hand, but before I give you the floor, I would like to have a broader image by inviting now Florian Dussault from Orange. You listened to the 3 previous speakers. You also have a strong experience already within Orange about these issues. Can you tell, how would you phrase or express the need for a wider and deeper practical collaboration between producers and users? And how do you see the benefits? Is it for environment? Is it for the business? Is it for job creation? Can you share your views on that? Florian.
Thank you very much, Jan. Indeed, in Orange, we are today structured to address this second-hand market as much as we can today. For many years now, we are struggling to try to extend the life of our product when it makes sense. Obviously, it's not always the case, and Elias perfectly summarize the situation that we need to find the right balance between a 100% new network, for instance, and the refurbished element. We can keep continue enjoying the raw materials we have today in hand, the functional equipment we can keep alive today. And I think that's very wide collaboration for, I would say, the suppliers, but also the regulations and, of course, the operators. And in Orange, if I can tell that we are facing the three main challenges that Elias and William just presented before, meaning we are supplying products like customer equipment, like IoTs, like network product. And we are relying on what the suppliers can propose to us in terms of short-term and long-term positive actions for this circular economy. And if I just can share a real comment, because now it's been 3 years, we are acting on all the continent, in Africa, in Middle East, and in Europe, in this second-hand market. And unfortunately, we are struggling to find reliable partners, struggling to find equipment, and struggling to find a partnership with the suppliers in this new trend. Because obviously, this is a disrupting approach. For tens of years now, the linear model has been working fine and properly, but today it reaches its limits. So in Orange, definitely, we are convinced that as a short-term answer that could be beneficial for business, for the planet, and for job creation would be to reach a consolidated and regulated second-hand market. This is definitely one of the wishes of the Orange Group today.
Is this a shared view with your colleagues in Nokia, ZTE, or Ericsson? Is that also a view that you share? Short-term action is about a more consolidated and regulated second-hand market. And we are speaking here about short-term. We have understood the wide spectrum of challenges that you have been picturing a few minutes ago, but on this quest, on this scream from Florian, is there a shared view on that? And then I will put you I will give you the floor, Elias. But for listening to the colleagues on that short-term action priority set by Florian.
I can start commenting Florian's talk. I fully support what Orange is their messaging. We have started to look into, as I mentioned before, we have started to look into refurbished, and that's together with Orange. We have looked into refurbished both spare parts, but now we are expanded it to more products as well. And that's because more and more operators, especially Orange, is focusing on second-hand equipment from the original vendor. Second-hand equipment exists today, but mostly from brokers. But if you get it from the original vendor, you can get more better reliability, etc. All the warranties, etc., etc. So I fully support that, and I think also that as I mentioned before, we need to look at the whole spectrum. Some equipment is not worth refurbishing due to the whole life cycle aspect on energy. Newer equipment is much better energy wise, but also that our equipment is software upgradable to 5G. So LTE equipment, 4G equipment is software upgradable. So that's the short comment on that. I would also like to answer your previous question a couple of minutes ago, Jan, on the taxonomy and sustainable finance topics. And a couple of weeks ago, we signed an agreement with 18 banks on our revolving credit facility. That's basically a security that companies have if all the money is gone, basically. So it's a $20 billion revolving credit facility. No, $2 billion revolving credit facility that is linked to different climate targets. So I think it's a huge step, and it's a really good effort and collaboration between our finance teams and the banks and our sustainability team.
Thank you, Daniel. Any other answers on this question about the on the taxonomy as a kind, well, as a direction and incentive?
Right, maybe I can first comment on the refurbished equipment. So that's a service that we do have for our customers already. So we're using a lot of spare parts, of course, internally in our repair processes, coming from products that are being returned from the market, but then also having this refurbished service as an original equipment manufacturer to offer the good quality, just like Daniel explained, warranty, latest software, all that for the customers who like to use the products that are in the second round. And the data that's been discussed a lot, and that's extremely important. And I see there's so much increased demand of data of all kinds when it comes to sustainability and practices. One topic that we have is a little bit related of the digital product passport is the document we call environmental product declaration. And that's the information we are actually already now sharing for our customers on the material content that can be used in the end of life. It's about product carbon footprint. It's about packaging. And there's been comments on plastics. And that's a question we see coming from our customers, like how much plastic there is in the packaging. So all this information is already put together and shared with our customers who like to look at the different environmental aspects of the products that they are purchasing from us.
Thank you for that. Elias, you are raising your hand, please.
Thank you. I don't want to take time because it's important to hear also Alessandro and Steve. So very quickly, to Tommy, we do have a research program that is looking at molecular tracking and things like that. So whatever you are experiencing and you have experience with that, we would welcome to see and where we can get with that as technology. What I wanted to say, the digital product passport doesn't need to go from the resource extraction to recycling. There are pieces along the chain and the value chain that are already useful. Pia just talked about, let's build on EPR and see what we can improve. Let's focus on manufacturing to repair, see what we can improve. Because if the recycling stays as it is, there's no point to create digital twin of a product and having a lot of energy and data and footprint of a digital product passport and its twin if it doesn't mean anything for recyclers because they have no capacity to work with it and to do anything. So we have to kind of chop it and see what is in the short term the most practical issue. But there is a reality. I hear you very strong. So all of the three manufacturers are very strong. Energy consumption first. I mean, we prefer new equipment. I mean, it's very clear. But please differentiate between the products that you actually have. You focus on the 15-year-old network equipment, but you also produce much shorter type of equipment. So this kind of a generalization, I would avoid and try to see how you can classify depending on the type of equipment and where you can really improve. But the main point is the new reality of supply chains, the new reality of not having access to materials, components, chips, and everything changes this narrative of new is better. Because I am talking to clients that want to, punk the banks. There are some banks that want to change their servers, or they want to do some, or big ICT or non-ICT companies that want materials, and they have to wait 2 years to get them. So the new supply chain, the post-COVID era, may actually rebalance that balance we're looking for and that Orange is asking for. So let us look at that, and maybe the European Green Digital Coalition is a way where we can discuss that, okay? Thank you.
And Elias, that this can be then further discussed into the coalition, but also you have that open call coming soon. This durability is better narrative that you are also asking for. Is that something that would be eligible for your call?
Yeah, there are calls directed to durability, circularity, tracking, and tracing. But there is a very specific call that we will have, that will open within a month, hopefully, that is on digital product passport for electronics. And let's sit together, all the representatives of the industry along the value chain, to see which information makes sense to exchange, who could have access to that, for what purpose. So we minimize, we go only for the necessary data with a purpose that will make a biggest impact. Not nice to have databases, we will get lost very quickly. So it has to be very, basically bottom up with the real players designed, not wishful thinking by academic actors.
Thank you, Ilias. And yes, time for me to go a little bit further in our agenda and to welcome Alessandro Gropeli and Stephen Moore. We thought it was extremely important to have also the views of the industry associations. We strongly believe at Csr Europe, and it's also the reason why we inaugurated last year the European Pact for Sustainable Industry. We believe a lot that the role of industry associations have also to move from only being a lobby that in the past 40 years was quite conservative, to become also these networks that can facilitate and empower their members to collaborate. Maybe first I would like to give the floor to Alessandro and your reaction as an association vis-a-vis the new EU policy approach. That is one, and then maybe I will ask Stephen from GSMA to give us already some illustration of how they act as a facilitator to incubate new collaborations between their members. But first, Alessandro, your overall reaction to this new context setting by the EU.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks a lot for having us as ETNO in this super interesting panel. I listened and it's a lot of good ideas. Let me start by a couple of, let's say, small details that might say or might tell us how the telecoms industry is looking at all of this. First of all, I noticed it's 8 years that I'm in ETNO, and I noticed that there has been a significant shift in how the experts of our companies that are Europe's biggest telecom operators on how they are approaching CSR and sustainability issues. I see more and more that the standalone sustainability expert is being accompanied now by experts of sustainability in the various functional parts of the company. So you have sustainability experts in value chain, with the CTO office, with the strategy office, with the government affairs office, which I think is maybe of an organizational, managerial, nerdy thing to notice, but to me, it means that sustainability is being built into let's say, the fabric of how our companies are organized. Also, what is interesting, we always had a sustainability development working group within ETNO, but also we have now a Green Deal task force. And the people who get involved are not only the policy people from the companies, but are really the people that inside the companies are looking into value chains or into the operations. So I think that this testifies a lot that what the Commission is doing right now is not only being taken very seriously by telecom operators, but it's also hitting a level of the companies that is not normally involved with the Brussels discussion, which might indicate that something concrete is really likely to happen. Let me now tell you how we look at the policies of the Commission. Basically, we look at it both from the supply side and the demand side. On the supply side, it's about the greening of our networks. It's the greening of our operations. And on the supply side, you mentioned it, you got network operations, network rollout. But one thing that we advocate a lot for is to look at the broader value chain. And I think that this panel is doing it very well, because you got the equipment vendors, but you also have the handsets and the phone manufacturers that must be part of the picture. But you should also think of the platforms. Think, for example, of energy usage. These days, everybody's talking about Squid Games that is attracting loads of traffics on the networks. So clearly also the streaming platforms, and we as users of the streaming platforms should be part of this conversation. So one other thing that we appreciate a lot of the European Commission work is that they are involving consumers, because it's a shared responsibility. We then look at the demand side, and I think that that's where the enabling potential or the greening by the new telecom networks enters into the game. We said that not only 5G and fiber are less energy intensive than the old networks, but also 5G and fiber can enable a series of use cases in vertical industries that will help the transition of other sectors. So if you are the manufacturing sector, or if you are the transport sector, or the public administration, by adopting these new connectivity technologies, you can reduce your own impact. So this brings me to zoom in a bit more on the policy question. Our main pledge right now is that, as it's testified actually by what was said before by both William and Ilias, setting up a coalition like the European Green Digital Coalition, on which we are very committed as Ethno and as an industry, is extremely important, because we need to start bringing to light that enabling potential that right now it's calculated, depending on the consultant or on the industry body, it's between 10 and 20% savings of CO2 reductions. What everybody agrees on is that it is potentially big. So we need to agree now on a way to measure it and to look at the demand side, at the enabling potential. This is for what concerns the demand side. But if we go back and close on the supply side, which is where we started from, the network operations and network rollout, our opinion is that there is a big choice for policymakers to be done. And it's a difficult choice, like all the choices that we are facing in this day and age, from the pandemic to the environmental issues, which is, do we develop policies that go more in the direction of coercion, or do we develop policies that go more in the direction of incentives? Our viewpoint as telecom operators is that there is one clear shared objective, which we as an industry share with our vendors, with the European Commission, and quite frankly with users, which is we want to transition from the legacy networks, the copper networks, the 3G, 4G networks, to the new, more energy efficient networks, which are fiber and 5G. This means that speed going forward will be an essential matter. So what we are telling to the European Commission is, if we share this objective, is look at the cumulated impact of regulation on this transition. Because when you add regulation to the existing one, the telecom sector is one of the most regulated sectors in the economy because of historical reasons. So we are regulated on spectrum, we are regulated on retail prices, we are regulated on wholesale prices. So there will be a difficult discussion on conciliating a series of policy and regulatory objectives that might come from DGs and from angles that go beyond the environmental angle. So at the end of the day, my message is, let's look at the broader picture. Let's look at that balance between coercion and incentives to ensure that we do this transition to the more energy efficient networks, 5G and FTTH, as fast as possible and in the best way possible. The last thing on which I would want to close is that circularity in this is a big discussion, because when you're ditching all the legacy networks and you are shifting to new networks, of course, there is the whole issue and discussion that Florian from Orange was bringing to light. Today, when our CEOs and our CTOs go to the investors and they go to the analysts, there is the problem of CapEx, investment. They want to know, why the hell do you want me to put so much money in transitioning to the 5G networks? Where is the business case? That's what our CEOs are asked. On the other hand, there is the OpEx question, operating expenditure, costs. And there, investors will ask you, how are you becoming more efficient? How are you gonna suck less energy from the grid so that your costs of operations will go down? So clearly, the circularity discussion has a role on the CapEx issue, on the investment issue. It also has a role around the operating expenditure issue. And my message here is that there is already quite a lot of thinking in the industry on how we could go about that. And I know that Stephen will be much more specific as to what the concrete solutions can be. So in short, I think that if I look at the telecom industry today, I see us much more as part of the solution when it comes to the environmental targets of the industry rather than part of the problem. But again, there will be more beefy and more concrete things that are gonna be said by my colleagues after me.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you to make it also extremely clear to understand and the need for this, the need also to be with the other platforms, energy and consumers is vital. That's also where, when you welcome this new approach of the European Commission towards these ecosystems and new alliances, and asking also for a good balance between coercion and incentives. Sorry for my English here. Complementary to Alessandro, it was really important for us and also for Orange to invite GSMA, and there we have the pleasure to have Stephen Moore. You are the head of climate action. How do you provide leadership and support to the industry to accelerate this transition that Alessandro was speaking about, but also this continuous transformation to the net zero objective that Europe has set to itself? So how do you work on practical collaboration with your members already today? And how much more is there room for even more practical collaboration, like on the issues raised by Florian? Stephen.
Thanks very much. It's good to be with you here this morning. I'll talk a bit first about where the sector is heading overall, and then dive into some specific projects that we're working on with our members. So, I mean, I think it's useful to kind of set as a context that as the mobile sector, as the GSMA on behalf of the mobile sector, we've set an ambition to be net zero by 2050 at the latest. And that's something that we agreed back in 2019. I mean, in addition to that, we've also now got the European Green Digital Coalition that has accelerated the timeline for that for a number of our members. And we were, really proud actually that half of the founding members of the European Green Digital Coalition were actually from the telco sector. And obviously that's accelerated the target from 2050 to 2040. Just in terms of what's happening globally on climate disclosure as well, which is really vital to getting a better handle on how we actually reduce our emissions and become more circular as an industry. So in terms of mobile network operators, 80% of them globally by revenue now are actually disclosing their climate impacts, which we've really seen accelerate over the last few years. And that's really important because it's not just about measuring your carbon emissions from your own operations. Many of these businesses are also now looking to measure, and in some cases it's more of an estimation of what the emissions are of their full value chain. which means, trying to work out what the emissions are of their supply chain, which is not an easy thing to do. And we've heard it mentioned on the discussion this morning already. So in addition to disclosure, though, we've seen a big increase in the proportion of the industry that's setting what are called science-based targets. So these are targets that are aligned to limiting global warming to 2 degrees or ideally 1.5 degrees. And actually now 2/3 of the industry by revenue in terms of mobile network operators globally have committed to set a science-based target or have already set one. And what that means is they are committed to effectively halving their emissions over the next 10 years, which is driving currently and is going to drive even more change across the whole of the industry. In addition to those 2/3, about 1/3 of the industry has gone further and said that they will be net zero by 2050 at the latest, and actually quite a number of companies are planning to do it earlier than that. So we know from the climate disclosures that actually the majority of the emissions for our industry lie upstream in the manufacture of products. And we've started to engage with key suppliers more intensively over the last couple of years to do two things. Firstly is to try and help them understand better what their carbon emissions are. And secondly is to support and encourage them to set science-based targets in the same way that mobile network operators have set these targets. And to do that, we've provided a number of webinars over the last year to support them to do that. The other thing that I wanted to dive into was some more detailed information about the project groups that we're working on across the industry. And I'll talk about 3 in particular, which is relevant to this discussion. So the first one is, how do we better measure our upstream and downstream carbon emissions and look to agree a more coordinated methodology across the industry, but also work to get better information so that we can understand what the emissions are, which will mean closer collaboration with suppliers, speaking to them about things like life cycle assessments so that we get more detailed data on emissions. The second project group I wanted to mention is something that Florian actually talked about earlier, and this is circularity of network equipment. So as he mentioned, we currently have some big challenges around this. For example, extending the lifespan of the equipment, having a viable second-hand market, amongst others. So what we've been doing is consulting with our members in collaboration with Orange to create what we hope to be a white paper on this issue, which will look at the challenges and potentially suggest some ways forward, which we would like to share in the next few months. And we hope that's going to kickstart a bit more of an in-depth conversation about how we can tackle some of these challenges and ultimately lead to more circularity in network equipment. The second project group I wanted to talk about, the third one, is around circularity of mobile phones. This is something that we've just started, although there's been a lot of separate initiatives across the industry, improving, for example, recycling rates, reuse rates, etc. We'd like to see whether we can agree a definition of circularity for the whole industry globally. So there's fantastic work being done across Europe on this, and we'd like to see whether we can, potentially take that, or whether it needs to be expanded or changed so that it could be applicable to the whole industry globally. We'd also like to look to understand what's best practice in this space, learning from operators in countries around the world, and ultimately to understand, well, how do we move the industry in the right direction on this? What are the different levers that we can pull? How can we best work together to achieve that? The final area I think it's worth mentioning is an initiative that actually launched earlier this year, and that's on an eco rating of mobile phones. So this was created by 5 of our European members: Orange, DT, Telia, Vodafone, and Telefonica. And what eco-rating looks to do is evaluate the environmental impact of the entire process of production, transportation, use, and disposal of mobile phones. And it gives the phone a score out of 100, with a higher score meaning that it's more environmentally friendly. So if you go onto the websites of one of those 5 members, you can actually see eco ratings against quite a number of phones that they sell. So this is helping to provide consumers with more information so they can make sustainable choices when they're buying their phones. So that's a bit of an overview of what's kind of happening across the industry globally, and also some specific initiatives that we're working on at the moment. But I think it's fair to say that we're really quite at the beginning of the journey, and there's a lot more to be done. So, I really welcome taking part in this discussion and figuring out how we can accelerate this action over the coming months, because that's what we're going to have to do.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for that. Thank you also, Alessandro, for this very, very interesting insights from the wider perspective of your associations. And I noticed that last project on the eco rating of mobiles, I think it's almost a direct answer to the, I think, forthcoming regulation on circularity that is then including also new rights for consumers in terms of better information for them to make better consumption decisions. Thank you for all this kind of very rich and complementary information. I'm looking at the timing and I see that there are some questions on the chat, but there I would then invite the ones who are receiving these questions then maybe to continue beyond this session, because we will have to close the session in the next few minutes. And therefore, I would like to invite Stefan Ketz to come for the conclusions of this session. Many in the business community and also more and more in the Commission are looking at you as one of the engineers of setting in place sector and cross-sector collaborations. The question is, how much have you been able to identify, to which extent are the conditions ready within the ICT, at least on the very short term, for setting up, widening or setting up new alliances or new collaborative projects. So I would like to give you the floor and to listen to what you have been picking up from this session. Stefan?
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you to you, but especially the speakers of the richness of the debate so far. I think when you talk about platforms, you talk mainly about in the automotive sector, the work we are doing there. And I see indeed that on this sector, in this ICT sector, there's a lot of very strong potential and a lot of good activity. But I wanted to start my conclusion first with, thanks to the ICT sector, I got on LinkedIn this morning some message in my feed from a global, a potential global movement of women. It's called 1 Million Women. It started in Australia, and they made a billboard. I don't know exactly where. It's on my LinkedIn feed, so people can find it there. But it was a billboard that says, if it can't be reused, reduced, repaired, rebuilt, refurbished, resold, recycled, or composted, then it should be restricted, redesigned, or removed from production. And it was a billboard that, and I thought, ooh, then I heard the people, soon after that, I heard the colleagues of the Commission, and that resonates very well what Ilias was saying in his call for a wider application of eco-design, or what William said in terms of value retention, the challenge of value retention. So there is not only regulatory pressure on this one. There is a societal need and a societal demand. Yesterday we had the climate march here in Brussels. There is, where I think that and especially the business to consumer, probably it's not yet translating in consumer behavior in the shop, but it's moving in that direction. And I think we should not wait until that behavior is changing. And I think I'm not going to summarize or bring together the richness of the debate you had, but what I heard is that next to the challenge of measurement, knowledge and data exchange, etc., there is a strong expectation from the regulators, but also I think from the consumers on reviewing business process from design to after sales, from eco design to include services and everything that is in between. And it's not only about energy consumption. The energy consumption is, of course, an agenda, and we heard it from the company speakers, that is picked up, that is driven also by the companies and their suppliers together with all this work on decarbonization, etc. So everyone has it on the agenda. It's also built in. It's encouraging to hear. I think that all divisions in companies are working on this one now, but the materials part, especially in the business to consumer business, stays very challenging. I think Florian mentioned that we are trying, and we do not reach scale, and we do not find the right business model for it. And I understand, and I thank you for that comment, because I think that would be the most visible, and I think it's also meeting the demand and the expectation, but also the most visible action that the sector could take is how can we tackle that in a very practical way? How can we make sure that we work together on that with the companies, the service providers and their suppliers in order to develop a kind of practical approach? And there I see individual responses, or each company trying to do, and we heard examples, and that's a good start. And it's like in the automotive sector when they started on supply chain and raw materials due diligence, they started doing individually, but they only could reach scale and some effect already, I think, when they started doing it more together, also on those sometimes more difficult competitive issues, because that's of course what hinders a little bit. Sometimes it's the competition element, but actually we think, well, from within the automotive experience, but I think here as well, providing a good refurbishment system in a very practical way is pre-competitive. It's a pre-competitive element if you do it in a very practical way for the industry itself. So there I still see as a conclusion the challenge, and how do you make that practical collaboration work? And there is work being done by companies, and we should see what are the strengths and the weaknesses of that. But there are the issues related to the data. There are the issues related to digital product passports, etc. That's, of course, that has to be taken care of. And I think the work that Ethno is doing there, but also Digital Europe, GSMA, etc., is very interesting for that. But I think the work that at the end, Steven said, what GSMA doing is on making this white paper, making this eco rating, but also translate that into, would be my conclusion, or that's what I hear from the expectation, translate that now already in practical collaboration between the B2C companies and their suppliers. That is something and there I would look at the Commission, where is there an opportunity that in 4, 5, 6 European countries, you do pilots at scale on that specific element that you are asking for, that is challenging, that has some dilemmas of collective action each time when there are competitors in place. But there, a Commission can make a breakthrough, I think, also with the incentives they provide or the funding they provide for a platform to look at how can we tackle at scale this B2C business refurbishment business together, but also looking together, if you work together, at what are purchasing requirements that each of these companies puts forward. And now you think, anti-competition. But there is a lot of possibility and I think the white paper and the eco rating might help on that, to see how can we commonly define and define what are our requirements as purchaser of equipment in terms of quality, potential for refurbishment and circularity, etc. So I think there is a lot of richness in the sector. I think it lacks a little bit practical collaboration on the ground in member states to start with, or in a wider area. And I would like to conclude with that, Jan. But thank you all for all that input.
Thank you, Stefan, very much. And I would like to, of course, take a few extra seconds to reach out our gratitude to all those who have been able to help us with organizing this roundtable as part of the wider summit on the SDGs. I, in particular, would like to thank Bernardo Scamaccia. He's head of quality and CSR within Orange. It's since a couple of months that we are preparing this roundtable. I think that we had a very rich and wealthy, smart mix of panelists. I would like to thank each of you individually, of course. It is also maybe interesting because this summit and the platform will stay open until the end of December. So we will be extremely keen if already in the chat now you can provide some of the links to the initiatives that you have been mentioning. Is it within the Commission, even the basics of having the link to the coalition, or is it what we have heard from Ethno or GSMA or from the company? So please drop any useful links to these very interesting sources. And I hope that the white paper to come in a couple of weeks or months, I think before December, if we can also have it, we will then put it on this platform that is accessible until the end of December, which is very convenient for many, many companies because the buffet that we have for this summit is too big to eat it all in 1 week. So they are planning that over the weeks to come, and also universities, professors and students are making use of this summit and all these sessions. So please do not hesitate to park some of the interesting initiatives that you have been mentioning. So thank you again to all of you. I wish you an extremely nice and rich summit. Don't miss, if I can use the very, very last slide, Emanuela. Yes, it is coming on screen. I still have, and it's not a problem to have still Stefan on my screen, but you have the final? Yes, we have it. And there you see what are some of the other sessions that you can witness. Is it today? Yes, especially today, but make use of the full agenda. It's a very rich agenda. Thank you again for the attention from all the attendees, and thank you to all the speakers. Have a nice day. Have a nice SDG Summit week. Goodbye.